The cold air inside the chamber made Maddie shiver as she stepped through the towering crystalline arch. The Zethyrus Tribunal Hall, known across the galaxy as the seat of ultimate judgment, was every bit as intimidating as she'd heard. Its walls, built from jagged violet crystals, shimmered with energy that hummed in strange, pulsating rhythms. Each pulse seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat, making her feel small, like a grain of sand caught in the tides of the cosmos. Hovering platforms orbited the hall, filled with alien dignitaries and diplomats who had come to witness the trial that would decide the fate of humanity. Maddie's footsteps echoed as she made her way to the center of the room, her heart racing with every step. At just 17 years old, she was an unlikely representative for her species. But humanity had no choice. Most of their leaders had perished in the final battle against the Zethyrus fleet. Earth's cities had been leveled, and the surviving humans had scattered across distant colonies, barely hanging on. The Zethyrus, with their towering forms and glowing eyes, were creatures of unfathomable power. Their psychic abilities had allowed them to subjugate entire species without lifting a single weapon. And now, after centuries of conflict, they had called for this final reckoning. As Maddie approached the platform where the tribunal judges sat, she couldn't help but stare. The lead judge, known only as High Adjudicator Zarval, was the largest of them all, his body draped in flowing robes made of light. His eyes burned with an ethereal white glow, and a crown of crystalline spikes hovered above his head. Around him were the other members of the tribunal, their expressions unreadable as they floated silently in their seats. Behind them, a massive energy field displayed images from humanity's history, scenes of human expansion into space, moments of discovery and triumph, but also flashes of destruction. Warships clashing in orbit, planets ravaged by battle, and the Earth itself, now a smoldering ruin. Maddie's chest tightened as she looked at the image of her home world. It had been overrun by the Zethyrus during the final invasion, and the blue skies and green fields she once knew were now nothing but ash and dust. A deep, resonating voice filled the chamber, cutting through Maddie's thoughts like a blade. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it reverberated directly into her mind. "Human child, step forward." It was Zarval, the High Adjudicator. His psychic voice carried the weight of 1,000 years, each word a command from the stars themselves. Maddie took a deep breath, forcing her legs to move as she stepped onto the center platform, a circular dais that hovered just above the ground. She could feel the weight of countless eyes, alien and human, fixed on her. The Zethyrus, with their stoic, otherworldly presence, sat motionless. The gathered dignitaries from other star systems whispered among themselves, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and judgment. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 1,000 times. What could she say? What could anyone say to stop the inevitable? She was no diplomat, no seasoned leader. She was just a girl who had lost everything. The tribunal's light intensified, and Zarval's gaze bore into her as he continued. Humanity stands accused of reckless expansion, of disrupting the balance of our sacred territories, and of provoking endless war. Your species has brought chaos to the stars. Do you deny these charges? The words hit her like a hammer. Deny? How could she? The evidence was all around her, displayed in the swirling holograms of Earth's violent history. Humanity had fought to survive, but in doing so, they had become a threat to the Zethyrus, and perhaps, to the galaxy itself. She knew it. They all knew it. Maddie swallowed hard, her throat dry as she tried to speak. The weight of the moment crushed her, and the rehearsed speeches she had imagined fell apart in her mind. What could she possibly say to change their minds? She opened her mouth, but before she could form a coherent argument, her body betrayed her. A low growl echoed in the silent chamber. Her stomach. Maddie froze, her eyes widening in embarrassment. She hadn't eaten in days, not since she had been brought to this distant star system for the trial. Food had been scarce among the human survivors, and the tension of the trial had made her forget her hunger until now. The growl came again, louder this time. She wanted to die on the spot. Her cheeks flushed crimson as she looked up at the judges, hoping they hadn't noticed. But, of course, they had. Zarval tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "What is this?" Interruption, his voice echoed through her mind, filled with cold suspicion. Maddie could feel her heart pounding, but all she could think about was how absurd the situation had become. Here she was, standing before the most powerful beings in the galaxy, on trial for the survival of her entire species, and all she could think about was food. She blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "I'm hungry," she said, her voice small but clear. A ripple of shock passed through the room. The alien dignitaries whispered louder, and even the Zethyrus judges seemed taken aback. Zarval's glowing eyes flickered for a brief moment, and the other judges exchanged glances, their telepathic connection buzzing with thoughts that Maddie couldn't decipher. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was suffocating. Then, Zarval leaned forward, his glowing eyes narrowing as he studied her more intently. His voice, when it came, was filled with disbelief and curiosity. "Hungry," he repeated, as if the word were foreign to him. "In the face of extinction, your final plea is hunger?" Maddie's mind raced. She could feel the weight of the question, and the absurdity of her situation only made her heart beat faster. But the truth was simple. She was hungry in a way that went beyond just food. She was starving for survival, for hope, for something to cling to in the face of overwhelming odds. She was desperate. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I'm hungry." Zarval's glowing eyes flickered again, this time with something more complex. It wasn't anger or ridicule, it was something closer to curiosity, as if her words had ignited some small spark of interest within him. For the first time, the high adjudicator turned his head slightly, glancing at the other judges. Their telepathic link buzzed to life, and though Maddie couldn't hear their exact words, she could feel the shift in the room. The Zethyrus were ancient beings, bound by logic and reason, but something about her simple, human statement had shaken them. Zarval turned back to her, his gaze more intense now. Slowly, he raised his hand, and a wave of shimmering energy rippled through the air. The hum of the room grew louder, and Maddie felt something change. Before her, the ground shimmered and morphed, and then, impossibly, a banquet appeared. Plates piled high with strange, glowing fruits, steaming meats, and dishes she couldn't even name. The scent was intoxicating, and her stomach growled again, this time louder. Maddie's eyes widened in disbelief. Was this some kind of test? A trick? She looked up at Zarval, but his face remained unreadable. "You claim to be hungry, human girl," Zarval's voice echoed in her mind. "Very well. Eat. Let us see what kind of hunger drives you." Maddie hesitated for only a moment before she reached out, her hand trembling as she picked up one of the glowing fruits. The eyes of the entire room were on her, waiting to see what she would do. She took a bite. And in that moment, everything changed. The moment Maddie bit into the glowing fruit, a surge of warmth spread through her body, starting from her mouth and racing down her spine like liquid fire. The taste was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, sweet, but with a depth of flavor that seemed to hum with power. It wasn't just food, it was as if the very essence of the stars had been distilled into each bite. The chamber grew impossibly quiet. Even the whispers of the alien dignitaries ceased as all eyes fixated on her. Maddie barely noticed, too consumed by the energy coursing through her body. She felt an immediate clarity in her thoughts, her senses sharpening as though a veil had been lifted. She could hear the faint hum of the crystalline walls, feel the subtle vibrations of the hovering platforms around her, and even sense the quiet storm of psychic conversation between the Zethyrus judges. The table was laid out with strange, otherworldly foods pulsating, glowing fruits, steaming meats that seemed to shimmer in the light, and delicacies that floated gently above their platters. Each item called to her in a way that transcended mere hunger. It was as if the food itself was alive, radiating energy, beckoning her to consume more. Without hesitation, she reached for another item, this time a small, iridescent orb that floated just above the surface of the table. As she swallowed, she felt a pulse of energy resonate deep within her, as though her body had unlocked something dormant inside her. The sensation was almost overwhelming. "Human girl," Zarval's voice cut through the intensity of her experience, cold and precise. "Do you understand what you are consuming?" Maddie looked up, her mind still reeling from the strange, exhilarating effects of the food. Zarval's eyes glowed more intensely now, his towering figure motionless as he studied her closely. His fellow judges remained silent, their eyes flickering with subtle light as they communicated psychically, their conversation just beyond Maddie's reach. She swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. "No," she admitted, her voice small in the vastness of the chamber. "But I feel something. Different. Stronger." The lead judge's gaze intensified, as if weighing her very soul. "The Feast of Empires," he began, his voice resonating through her mind. "It is no ordinary meal. It is a rite of passage, reserved only for those deemed worthy of leadership among the stars. The food you consume is imbued with the very essence of creation itself, energy drawn from the most ancient forces in the universe. It enhances not just your body, but your mind, your spirit, your connection to the cosmos." Maddie felt a shiver run down her spine. She looked down at the table before her, suddenly realizing the magnitude of what she had just eaten. This was more than sustenance, it was a test. A test she hadn't even realized she was taking. Zarval continued, his psychic voice tinged with something that almost resembled curiosity. "Only those who can wield the power of the feast without being consumed by it are allowed to lead within the Zethyrus Empire. It was never intended for humans. And yet, you consume it with ease." Maddie blinked, her mind racing to process what Zarval was saying. She had heard stories about the Zethyrus and their vast psychic abilities, about how their society was structured around the mastery of cosmic energies that humans couldn't even begin to understand. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. She glanced at the table again, her hand still hovering near another glowing fruit. The energy from the food was still thrumming through her veins, filling her with a strength she had never felt before. She didn't just feel alive, she felt powerful, like the boundaries of her mind and body had expanded, connected somehow to the very fabric of the universe. Maddie hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I didn't know. I was just hungry," Zarval finished for her, his voice soft but sharp, like the edge of a blade. "Yes. But hunger can be a dangerous thing, human girl. The hunger for power, for survival, for dominance. It is what has driven your species to the brink of destruction." Maddie felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. The alien judge's words stung, reminding her of the terrible truth behind this trial. Humanity had spread through the stars, often recklessly, driven by their own hunger for resources, for territory, for more. And now, they stood on the edge of extinction because of it. But as she stood there, feeling the power of the feast coursing through her, she also felt something else. Determination. A spark of defiance. "But hunger can also drive us to survive," Maddie said, her voice stronger now, as the energy from the food filled her with newfound confidence. "To adapt. To evolve. That's what humans do. We learn. We fight when we have to, but we also grow. You say this food is meant for leaders, maybe it's time you see us as more than just a threat." The room fell deathly silent once again. Zarval's glowing eyes locked onto hers, his expression unreadable. The other judges remained motionless, but Maddie could feel the tension in the air. They were watching her more intently now, their telepathic discussions swirling like invisible storms just out of her reach. After what felt like an eternity, Zarval slowly rose from his seat, his towering form seeming to expand even further as he stepped forward. He stopped just before Maddie, his presence overwhelming, like a tidal wave of energy pressing down on her from all sides. You speak with fire, human child, he said, his psychic voice quieter now but no less powerful. But fire is both a creator and a destroyer. You claim your kind can evolve, yet your species has left a trail of destruction across the stars. Why should we believe you are any different? Maddie swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. She knew this was the crux of the trial, humanity's chance to prove they were worth saving. They had fought and bled and burned in their struggle to survive, but they had also caused chaos and ruin along the way. But she wasn't going to give up now. Not after everything. Because we've learned, she said, her voice steady now, despite the pressure surrounding her. We've made mistakes, but we've also seen the consequences. I'm standing here because I'm one of the last. Humanity is on the brink, yes, but we've been here before. We always find a way to survive, to change. You said the feast is for those who can handle the power it brings. I've eaten it, and I'm still standing. Isn't that proof enough that we're capable of more? For a long moment, Zarval said nothing. The other judges stirred slightly, their eyes flickering with uncertainty as they exchanged silent thoughts. The alien dignitaries in the balconies above leaned forward, watching intently as the drama unfolded before them. Finally, Zarval spoke again, his voice heavy with meaning. Perhaps, he said slowly, as if considering every word carefully. Perhaps there is more to your species than we have seen. But this is not for me alone to decide. He turned to the other members of the tribunal, his mind reaching out to them in a deep, complex psychic link that Maddie could now sense more clearly than ever before. Their thoughts were a storm of emotions: doubt, fear, curiosity, and something else. Hope? After what felt like an eternity, Zarval turned back to Maddie, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. The Feast of Empires is only the beginning, he said. You have passed the first test. But there are many more trials ahead. Humanity's fate is not yet sealed, but the path forward is narrow. We will see if you are truly worthy of redemption. Maddie let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She had bought them time to prove that humanity could be more than the chaos they had caused. Time to show that they could evolve, as they always had. But as the shimmering banquet table faded away, leaving only the cold, crystalline floor beneath her feet, Maddie knew one thing for certain. The real challenge had only just begun. The shimmering banquet table vanished, and the rush of power from the Feast of Empires still hummed through Maddie's veins, but now it felt different, charged with purpose. The food she had consumed, meant for leaders of galaxies, had amplified something deep inside her. Her senses, once dull from exhaustion and fear, were now razor-sharp. Every pulse of energy in the crystalline hall felt like a heartbeat she could hear, as if the entire universe was whispering in her ear. Maddie stood taller, her legs no longer shaking beneath her. The overwhelming pressure of the Zethyrus tribunal had lessened, though it was still present, a constant, heavy force. But now, instead of being crushed beneath it, she could stand her ground. Zarval remained at the center of the hovering platform, his towering figure still and unreadable. His glowing eyes had dimmed slightly, but his mind was fully awake, probing her with more intensity than before. Maddie could feel the other judges watching too, their collective consciousness locked onto her like 1,000 eyes in the darkness. You consumed the feast, and yet, you remain, Zarval's voice boomed, his psychic projection filling her mind. But power is not given lightly. The feast tests more than just strength, it tests your ability to control what you do not understand. Do you comprehend what you now hold inside you? Maddie swallowed hard. The truth was, she didn't fully understand it. She could feel the energy, the buzzing in her mind, but she had no idea how to wield it or what it meant. And yet, as she stood there, something deeper whispered within her, a voice that wasn't entirely hers, but felt like it had been part of her all along. I don't know everything, she said, her voice steady. But I can feel it. This power, it's like it's waking something up inside me. And I think I can use it. A murmur of surprise rippled through the gallery above, where alien dignitaries from dozens of species watched. The tribunal's eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, flickered in unison, their telepathic link buzzing with activity. They were discussing her, debating whether she was lying, or perhaps, if she was even more dangerous than they had thought. The lead judge stepped closer, his robes of light flowing as if moved by an invisible wind. He extended a hand, and from it, a shimmering wave of energy burst forth, like a rippling tide of starlight. It hung in the air between them, suspended in a field of glowing crystals that hummed with intensity. "Then prove it," Zarval said, his voice cool but commanding. "This is the power of the cosmos, the energy that binds all life and matter. Show us you can control it, or humanity's fate will be sealed here and now." Maddie's breath caught in her throat. The glowing wave in front of her pulsed like a living thing, waiting for her to reach out. She didn't know what to do. She had never been trained for this, had never wielded power like the Zethyrus. But as the warmth from the feast surged inside her, she realized she had no choice. It was either try and fail, or let humanity perish. Tentatively, she raised her hand, her fingers trembling as she reached toward the glowing energy. As soon as her hand made contact, a sharp jolt ran up her arm, and she gasped. The power was wild, raw, and alien, like trying to grasp a star with her bare hands. Her mind was flooded with images, flashes of distant galaxies, spirals of stars, and strange, unfamiliar worlds. She could hear the echoes of countless voices, both alien and human, crying out across the void of space. It was overwhelming, like trying to hear a million conversations at once, each one fighting for her attention. "Focus," a voice whispered inside her, though it was not Zarval's. It was something softer, deeper hers, but not hers. "You are not a vessel. You are the key. Remember who you are." Maddie closed her eyes, centering herself. She could feel the power surging through her, but instead of letting it overwhelm her, she began to breathe slowly, deeply, as if drawing the energy into herself, not fighting it, but merging with it. The wildness of the power, once untamable, began to soften under her touch. The glowing field in front of her responded. The light around it brightened and pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. The chaotic surge of energy began to slow, like a storm quieting under the touch of calm winds. She wasn't just controlling the power, she was becoming a part of it, flowing with it as it flowed with her. The room, which had been filled with murmurs and whispers, fell silent again. Even Zarval's psychic voice remained quiet, as if he too were waiting for something to happen. Then, slowly, Maddie began to move her hand, guiding the energy with her fingers. The shimmering wave of starlight followed her movements, bending and twisting in the air. With a gentle flick of her wrist, she wove it into shapes, first a simple spiral, then a twisting helix, and finally, she shaped it into a glowing sphere that hovered between her hands, pulsing with quiet power. Her heart raced, but not from fear. This time, it was exhilaration. She could feel the energy responding to her will, bending to her command. It wasn't perfect, she could sense the rawness of her control, the unrefined nature of the power, but it was there. It was hers. Maddie opened her eyes, the glowing sphere still floating gently in her hands. She looked up at Zarval, whose expression was unreadable, but his eyes glowed brighter now, filled with something like respect or perhaps caution. "You have control," Zarval acknowledged, though there was no warmth in his tone. "But control is fleeting. What will you do with this power, human girl? Will you use it to protect? To destroy? Or will you allow it to consume you, as your kind has allowed hunger to consume your worlds?" The other judges remained silent, but Maddie could feel their attention locked onto her. This was the moment. The true test. She let the glowing sphere dissolve, its energy returning to the air around her. The warmth of the feast still pulsed inside her, but now it felt calmer, more focused. She wasn't going to let it consume her. She had seen what unrestrained hunger had done to humanity, to her world, and to countless others. But she wasn't going to make the same mistake. "I'll use it to survive," Maddie said, her voice clear and confident. "But not just for me, for everyone. We're more than the chaos you see in us. We can change. We can grow. You said this power is for leaders. Well, I'm here to lead us towards something better. That's what I'll do with it." The room was still. Even the alien dignitaries, who had been quietly observing, seemed to hold their breath. Zarval's eyes flickered, and for the first time, his cold expression softened just slightly. "Perhaps," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Perhaps there is more to humanity than I have seen." He stepped back, his gaze still locked on Maddie. The tension in the room eased, but the weight of the moment remained. "The tribunal will deliberate," Zarval announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "But know this, human girl, the path forward is perilous. You have passed the test of control, but there are more trials ahead. Your actions from this moment will determine the fate of your kind." Maddie nodded, her heart still racing, but filled with a new sense of hope. She had passed the first test. She had shown them that humanity wasn't just a force of destruction, that they had the capacity to wield power responsibly, to survive without letting hunger or chaos consume them. As the judges turned inward, their psychic connection buzzing with silent conversation, Maddie took a deep breath. She had bought humanity time to prove they were worth saving. But this was only the beginning. The real challenge was just beginning, and now, more than ever, she knew she couldn't afford to fail. With the power of the feast still pulsing inside her, she was ready for whatever came next. The chamber's hum grew louder as the Zethyrus tribunal began their deliberations, their psychic link vibrating with tension. Maddie stood alone on the platform, the warmth of the feast still coursing through her, though it now felt more like a gentle ember than the roaring fire it had been before. She watched as the judges communicated, their glowing eyes flickering in synchrony. Though she couldn't hear their thoughts directly, she could sense their energy, a swirling storm of doubt, curiosity, and ancient authority. For the first time, Maddie wasn't overwhelmed by the vastness of the tribunal's power. She wasn't just a girl standing in front of an unstoppable force anymore. The energy she had absorbed from the feast had connected her to something deeper, something primal. It had opened her mind, allowing her to see the Zethyrus not as gods, but as beings bound by their own fears, their own uncertainties. And now, Maddie knew that they needed something from her just as much as humanity needed their mercy. The lead judge, Zarval, finally turned back to face her, his towering figure casting long shadows across the crystalline floor. His eyes glowed brighter than before, filled with a cautious intensity. "The tribunal has reached its decision," he announced, his psychic voice booming through the room, every word weighed down by the gravity of the moment. "Humanity will not be erased." Maddie felt her chest tighten with relief, though she didn't dare let her guard down. The statement hung in the air like an unfinished sentence, and she knew there was more to come. Zarval's voice grew darker, sharper. "However, this reprieve is not unconditional. Your kind has caused immeasurable harm across the stars, and we cannot allow such recklessness to continue unchecked. The Zethyrus have long been the guardians of balance in the cosmos, and we will not allow chaos to reign." Maddie clenched her fists, her heart pounding. She had expected as much. There was no way they were going to let humanity walk away freely. But she wasn't just going to accept their terms without understanding what was at stake. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice firm, no longer the trembling whisper it had been when the trial began. Zarval's eyes flickered, as though surprised by her directness. He paused for a moment, considering his next words carefully. "You will be placed under our protection," he said slowly, as if each word carried a hidden weight. "Your remaining colonies will be allowed to survive, but they will do so under Zethyrus oversight. You will be given the chance to rebuild, but only if you prove yourselves worthy. Should humanity falter, should you revert to your old ways of expansion and destruction, we will not hesitate to end your species once and for all." Maddie's heart sank. This wasn't freedom, it was submission. Humanity would survive, but only as a subservient race, watched and controlled by the Zethyrus like children being scolded. It wasn't the destruction of Earth, but it was still a cage. She opened her mouth to protest, to argue that they could grow without being leashed, but before she could speak, Zarval stepped closer, his eyes narrowing with a strange glimmer of emotion, something she hadn't seen before. "There is another option," he said, his voice quieter now, more personal, as though this was something only he could offer. The room seemed to hold its breath. "What option?" Maddie asked, her pulse quickening. Zarval's eyes bore into her, his psychic presence pressing into her mind, not in a hostile way, but probing, searching. "An alliance," he said simply. Maddie blinked, her mind racing. "An alliance," she repeated, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Yes," Zarval confirmed. "The Zethyrus have stood as the guardians of the cosmos for millennia, but our empire is not invincible. We are vast, but stretched thin. Our control is not as absolute as it once was, and we face threats from forces you cannot yet comprehend. Your species, reckless as it has been, possesses something we lack, the will to adapt, to fight with fire even when the odds are hopeless. That is a force we can no longer afford to ignore." Maddie's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was why they hadn't just destroyed humanity outright. They weren't simply judging her species, they were afraid of what lay beyond their borders, of threats too great even for their ancient power to contain. She stood straighter, her mind racing. If they needed humanity, then they had leverage. "You want our help," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "You need us to fight for you, to protect your empire." Zarval's expression didn't change, but she could feel the truth behind his words as he spoke again. "It is more than just fighting," he explained. "The feast you consumed was a gift, a glimpse into the power that binds the universe. You have shown that you can wield it, that you can control it. If humanity can prove itself worthy, not as a threat, but as an ally, there may be a place for you among the stars. But it will not be given. It must be earned. A future." Maddie's mind spun. The Zethyrus weren't offering a handout, they were offering a test, a path forward. Humanity could survive, but only if they could prove they were more than just destructive forces. If they could show the Zethyrus that they could be trusted to wield power responsibly, to stand beside them as equals. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't annihilation either. It was a chance. "What does that mean?" Maddie asked, her voice cautious. "How do we prove ourselves?" Zarval turned slightly, glancing at the other members of the tribunal. Their glowing eyes flickered with silent agreement before Zarval spoke again. "There are other worlds, other species on the edge of collapse. Some are falling into chaos. Some are rising up against the order we have maintained for eons. You will be sent to these worlds. You will use the power of the feast to stabilize them, to protect them from destruction. If you succeed, your people will be granted the right to govern themselves once more. If you fail, the consequences will be grave." Maddie's stomach clenched. It was clear what Zarval meant. Failure wouldn't just mean the end of her mission, it would mean the end of humanity. The Zethyrus were offering them one chance to prove they could be more than conquerors and survivors. It was an opportunity to redeem themselves. "You're asking us to fight for you," Maddie said, narrowing her eyes. "To clean up your mess." Zarval's expression remained impassive. "If you wish to survive, human girl, you must become more than what you have been. You must show us that your hunger can be tamed, that you can wield the power we have given you for something greater than yourselves." The weight of the task ahead pressed down on Maddie's shoulders, but she didn't falter. She had already come too far, had fought too hard to let fear control her now. "We'll do it," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the chamber. "We'll prove ourselves. But know this, we're not just going to be your soldiers. If we fight for you, it's because we choose to, not because you command it." Zarval's eyes flickered with what almost seemed like respect. "Then let this be the beginning of a new trial," he said. "For your people, and for ours." The chamber was still, but Maddie could feel the shift in the air. This wasn't just a trial anymore, it was the start of something far bigger. Humanity had been given a chance, and for the first time since the trial had begun, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. But the road ahead was perilous, and there was no guarantee of success. The Zethyrus had given them a path forward, but it was narrow, and failure would mean the end of everything. As the tribunal began to withdraw, their figures fading into the shadows of the crystalline hall, Maddie felt the weight of her responsibility settle fully onto her shoulders. Humanity's survival now rested on her and those who remained. They would have to face the unknown, fight battles that weren't theirs, and prove that they were more than just the chaos they had caused. But for now, they had something they hadn't had in a long time.